I was never supposed to see the prince eat the heart of the old man. But I did. I saw it all. And now, I wish I hadn't. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the small village where I grew up. I will tell you how I came to witness the most terrifying thing in my life and how I barely escaped with my life. Our village, Ndibini, was like any other in the land. We had our traditions, our celebrations, and our stories that were passed down from generation to generation. The elders always warned us about the forest that surrounded our home. They said it was full of spirits, both good and bad. But what they never told us was the truth about the prince. Prince Mandla was the son of the king of our land. He was handsome and strong, and everyone respected him. But there were whispers, stories about how he had a dark heart. No one dared to speak against him openly, though. People who did were never seen again. One evening, just as the sun was setting and casting long shadows over the village, my father sent me to the forest to gather firewood. I didn't want to go, especially not at that time of day, but I was 13 and eager to prove my bravery. I remember the crunch of leaves under my feet and the way the wind whispered through the trees as I ventured deeper into the woods. I was alone and trying to gather as much wood as I could carry when I heard a low, deep chant. The sound was coming from somewhere close, behind a dense wall of bushes. Curiosity got the better of me. Quietly, I moved closer, patting the bushes just enough to see through. That's when I saw the prince and his men in a clearing, surrounding an old man tied to a tree. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Prince Mandla stood at the center, his eyes wild and glowing with a feverish intensity. He was holding a knife, its blade shining in the dim light. Around him, his men chanted, their voices rising and falling like the wind through the trees. The old man tied to the tree was Mom, the village elder who had gone missing 3 days before. His eyes were wide with fear, and his mouth was gagged with a piece of cloth. I watched in horror as the prince approached him. There was a terrifying gleam in his eyes, a hunger that I couldn't understand. With a swift motion, he plunged the knife into the elder's chest. Blood poured around the blade, staining the ground beneath them. The men cheered as if this was some kind of twisted celebration. Then, with hands dripping in blood, the prince reached into the old man's chest and pulled out his heart. My stomach turned, and I felt like I was going to be sick. The prince held the heart up high for everyone to see. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied. And then, to my utter disbelief, Prince Mandla took a bite out of it, blood streaming down his chin. I must have made a noise because suddenly, the prince's gaze shifted to where I was hiding. His eyes locked onto mine. For a second, I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. His men turned, following his gaze, and I knew I had been seen. Fear overtook me, and I ran as fast as I could, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I heard shouts, and the pounding of footsteps getting closer. Find him, the prince's voice echoed through the forest, a command as cold and sharp as the knife he had wielded. I ran until my legs felt like they would give out. Somehow, I managed to find my way back to the village. I didn't stop running until I burst through the door of our small home, panting and gasping for air. My father looked up, alarmed by my sudden entrance. I tried to speak, to explain what I had seen, but no words would come out. Instead, I collapsed, darkness closing in around me. When I awoke, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the walls, casting long shadows across the room. My father sat beside me, a worried look on his face. "What happened?" he asked softly, his voice laced with concern. I took a deep breath, then told him everything. Every horrifying detail of what I had witnessed in the forest. As I spoke, his expression changed from worry to something darker, something I hadn't seen before. "You must never speak of this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "The prince, he is cursed. It is said that those who taste the heart of another gain power and strength. It is a forbidden ritual, an ancient magic that should never be practiced. But the prince, he seeks power above all else. My heart pounded in my chest. But why would he do this? Why would he kill Mom? My father shook his head, his eyes sad and tired. Because the prince believes that with every heart he consumes, he becomes stronger, more invincible. It is madness, and it has corrupted him. But he is the prince, and no one dares to stand against him. For days, I lived in fear, expecting the prince or his men to come for me. But nothing happened. Life in the village continued as usual, with people too afraid to acknowledge the darkness that had taken root in our midst. But I couldn't forget what I had seen. I couldn't shake the image of the prince's blood-stained smile from my mind. I knew I had to do something, but what could a boy like me do against a powerful prince? Then I had an idea. I went to the other villagers, quietly telling them what I had witnessed. At first, they were skeptical, afraid to believe that the prince could be so monstrous. But slowly, they began to listen, their fear giving way to anger. We devised a plan. The next time the prince ventured into the forest, we would be ready. We would catch him in the act and expose his true nature to everyone. It was risky, dangerous even, but we had to try. A week later, the opportunity presented itself. The prince and his men were seen heading into the forest again, their intentions clear. This time, I wasn't alone. A group of villagers, brave and determined, followed me as we trailed behind them, silent as shadows. We reached the clearing just as the ritual was beginning. Prince Mandla was once again at the center, his men chanting around him. Another unfortunate villager was tied to the tree, his fate sealed. Before the prince could strike, we stepped out from the cover of the trees, surrounding them. The chanting stopped, replaced by shocked silence. The prince's eyes narrowed, anger flickering across his face. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cold and threatening. One of the elders stepped forward, his voice steady. "We know what you are, Prince Mandla. We know of your wickedness, your dark deeds. You cannot hide the truth any longer." For a moment, it seemed like the prince might attack us, his grip on the knife tightening. But then something unexpected happened. The villagers began to speak up, their voices rising together, a chorus of defiance. "You will not harm us anymore," one shouted. "We will not be ruled by fear," another added. Faced with the collective will of the village, the prince hesitated. His eyes flicked between us, searching for any sign of weakness. But we stood firm, united in our resolve. Finally, with a growl of frustration, he lowered the knife. His men, unsure of what to do, followed suit. The prince glared at us, hatred burning in his gaze. "This isn't over," he spat, before turning and disappearing into the forest, his men trailing behind him. With the prince gone, the village breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the fear of his return lingered, a shadow that hung over us all. The elders decided to send word to the king, revealing the truth about his son's dark deeds. It was a risk, but one that had to be taken. We couldn't allow the prince to continue his reign of terror. As for me, I often think back to that night in the forest, the image of the prince consuming the heart forever etched in my mind. I had seen the darkness that lurked within him, a hunger for power that knew no bounds. I learned that bravery wasn't just about facing danger, it was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Our village had faced its darkest hour, but we had emerged stronger, united in the face of evil. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that the prince was punished for his crimes. But life is never that simple. There are still whispers in the wind, stories of a dark figure roaming the land, seeking vengeance. And every time the sun sets, casting long shadows over the village, I wonder if he will return. But if he does, we will be ready. We will not be afraid. Because we have seen the face of darkness, and we have stood against it.